if you're just joining us, let me give you the quickie thumbnail takeaways for what we've come through in Genesis. Genesis 1 is all about the creation of everything. Everything. And the bottom line takeaway from Genesis 1 is, yes, this place isn't accidental. God made it. Now, if he made it, then it also strongly implies that he owns it. And if he owns it, then that strongly implies that he has a purpose behind it. So chapter 1 of Genesis, if you leave it out of the entire, takeaway of the Bible, is the fact that sure enough, God made this place, and he made it with an intention, and he owns the place. So anything that we use in this...
How about 2?
Wow, that one looks like it's been in the desert too. Yeah, we must have had some kind of thing happen. Oh, I don't know where... Oh, there they are. They're over there. I forgot where I put them. Sorry. So if God indeed made this place and he owns this place, he has a purpose for this place, and we are really only renters, not owners of this place. That changes your whole perspective about why we're here and what's going on. And that maybe one day, let me see if this works. It still doesn't work. And that maybe one day he may come back and collect the rent, which sure enough is what happens in a few chapters later is... I can check with my laser. Boy, maybe all these batteries are just defuncto. Okay, there we go. I'll just have to roll the things around for a while. Or lick them. No, you don't want to lick them. So if he owns a place, it could very well be a day coming he's going to come to collect on the rent. And that's really the idea, is that mankind as his creation is only here by his good pleasure, and we don't own the place. But again, if the evil one wants to twist our understanding of creation, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to attack the fact that God made this place. There is no God. It's all accidental and random. Then also at the end of chapter 1, you get this incredible idea that God created in 6 days, and then the seventh day he rested. And that, it strongly implies he's waiting to enjoy it with us. Jesus later on says that the Sabbath was not made, man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for man. The Sabbath is a time for us to actually enjoy and put everything to rest. And so it strongly implies in chapter 1 that God created this place for a purpose, and that purpose is enjoying it with us in fellowship. You get to chapter 2, he does a flashback. He talks about the creation of man and woman. He talks about how he made them in their image, and he gives them responsibilities, and he asks them to take care of the place, and man and woman are formed, and God makes an incredible observation about his deliberate design of man. He says, it's not good that man should be alone, which means that God made mankind as connected creatures. None of us is self-generating, self-sustaining, self-anything. We are made to be connected. I watched a sociologist this week, and she was talking about a life work that she's done, and she says, you know what I found out? Man is fundamentally made to be connected. Genesis 2 could have told you that. So there is this idea of relationship, not only relationship with one another, male and female, but with God himself. He's the most essential connection. That's what you get out of chapter 2. Chapter 3, they are fooled by the serpent, and the fall happens. They basically stiff-arm God and say, I don't want to be with you. I like the place, but I don't want you. I want to be like you, is what the serpent tempts. And then we have the great fall. They're cast out of the garden. Later, chapter 4, we move after that. They have kids. That doesn't work out real well. Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. Cain's line is horrible and ends up inheriting an incredible predisposition toward evil. It's just a horrible thing, and he tells us all about that in chapter 4. You get to chapter 5, and we get one of the strongest hints of the fact that a rescue is going to come to fix the problem of the rebellion. In chapter 5, we see the names of the descendants from Adam all the way to Noah. Remember that? And we looked at the Hebrew definitions of the names. Remember that? And it said an incredible thing about the fact that the blessed God will come down teaching that his death shall bring rest. An incredible clue about the rescue that's coming. Chapter 6, we get to the further corruption of mankind, and we talk about how things really go south and how man left to his own ends up being incredibly bad. And so what God decides to do is wipe them all out with a flood. He did it once. He won't do a flood again, but judgment is coming on as wide a scale as that. And that's what he's trying to tell us in chapter 6. As the corruption of mankind, he says basically, every intent of their thoughts and hearts was evil continually. Great violence, horrible place. And so the cries of all the generations of mankind who shake their fist at God and say, God, when are you going to intercede and bring justice to this unjust situation? You're asking for the flood, because that's when he did it. There will be another time. There'll be a second time he'll judge. We'll see a little about today. And he will indeed intercede. You get to 7, and it's the details about the flood itself, the shape of the ark, the animals that went in. You get to chapter 8, and the flood subsides. And in those chapters, 7 and 8, it's not really so much a story about destruction. It's a story about salvation. That in the midst of all of this decay and rot, is what he says, of what mankind has become, God provides a way for a man and a wife and his family. Salvation. It's a salvation story. And in fact, the writers of the New Testament pick it up later and say, that ark that Noah used, it's kind of like Jesus. And they talk about the connections. It's a salvation story in 7 and 8 in Genesis. When you get to chapter 9, then God makes a promise to mankind and seals it with a sign, his rainbow. Not his bow and arrow to kill us, but his bow now aimed upward, the colorful bow, to remind us that he never will wipe out mankind again with a flood. But it's also a reminder that God can wipe out mankind. And that's what the flood is there for. It's serving notice to mankind that if mankind gets to a state again that it's so evil and corrupt, God's not going to stand on the sidelines and just let it go forever. And again, our voices cry out for justice, and in the end, God will bring justice again. That time, not with a flood, but with fire, is what Peter says. And then we get down to chapter 10, the descendants of Noah. We looked at that last week. We looked at how the sons of Noah, the 3 sons of Noah, ended up making all these nations all over the world. I mean, they populated the whole earth from these guys. And so that's what we get in chapter 10. And that finally brings us to chapter 11, which is, see if this works, the Tower of Babel. Now, why the Tower of Babel? Please work. Yay. Okay. So remember last week we talked about this very thing, that the sons of Noah came out of the ark, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan, very famous bad name from the Old Testament. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these, the whole earth was populated. Now, sometimes, when I talked earlier about, is this scientifically defensible, that from Noah and his wife and 3 guys, you can inhabit, you have all the races of the world. Well, yeah. And this one actually is scientifically defensible. I've done a bunch of reading on this. You can do something as simple as go to Wikipedia and type in most recent common ancestor. And what they've done genetically is they've looked at all of our DNA from races all over the entire world and said, is there a commonality about our DNA? Does it look like our DNA at one point came from one strand of DNA, from one single person? And that one single person is called the most recent common ancestor. And sure enough, they say, yeah. It turns out that all the races of mankind can be traced back to a single, most common recent ancestor, the most recent one. There's actually there's a shared ancestor idea that comes before that that's a little bit older, but the same sort of idea. Can you take all the racial genetics we have and basically say they came from a single source? And they say yes. And you know what they say about how recent it could be? One study says between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago from today. So the racial mix that comes worldwide from the sons of Noah is actually scientifically defensible and came from their superset of DNA. But I didn't want to go on that. So here's the 3 sons. We looked last week how Japheth had these sons, and then Ham had these sons. And we have a lot of ites and ems, which tells us that these are actually whole nations and people groups that come out of them. Shem has these people act right here. And Eber, right over here, this is Eber. That's where we get the word Hebrew. Hebrew. Got it? Okay. And in fact, the nation of Israel comes out of not just Eber, but Peleg right there. And he doesn't include that in the list. But he will later after today in chapter 11. So that's where we've come to. For today, we come to the Tower of Babel. And what was that about, and was it real? And here's probably one of the most famous artist renditions done in 1500s by Peter Bruegel the Elder. I don't know who the younger was, but here they are building it up. But actually, this is probably not a great representation because we have seen towers archaeologically in the Mesopotamian area of the world that are very, very, very old. One in the digs at what is now called Ur, and they look more like this. In fact, that's exactly what the foundations of it look like, and it's called the Ziggurat of Ur. We're pretty sure this is what it looked like. Where's Ur? Iraq. Go down to where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers join together and then dump into the Is that the Persian Gulf? I always forget. Ur is very close to where that is. So yeah, here's the ziggurat of Ur. In fact, you can go to that part of Iraq today. If you type in the ziggurat of Ur and say, show me a picture of this, you'll see American soldiers visiting the ziggurat of Ur when we were occupying Iraq. Yeah, real. But what they've done is they've rebuilt the bottom wall, and there's a mound in the middle of it of where the top of the thing has fallen down and kind of smashed down over the years. But it's been shown to be many, many thousands of years old. Ziggurat. So this is a ziggurat. Interestingly enough, this is just a freebie for you. If you type in ziggurat on Google, you also get another picture. You know what you get? You get this. That's called the Ziggurat Pyramid of Dubai. So there's some developers in Dubai, and Dubai's got money, who want to build this incredible pyramid that will house 1 million people. It'll be a city inside a structure, and it'll be all self-contained. It'll be self-sustained in the sense that it generates enough power on its own because of solar stuff that it can just be there, and it can be a whole city of 1 million people. And it's called the Ziggurat of Dubai to this very day. So it's like what goes around comes around is what it is. They're going to do that in Arizona? Oh, really? Like this?
Not like that, but the same idea.
Yeah. 1 million people. Here's the 1 million people in the desert. Here's a couple other places you could put it. Some views. It's a really nice kind of place. And here's the idea of how it would look in a more temperate area and stuff like that. So you, too, can live in the ziggurat of Dubai with 1 million other people. Don't think so? Well, anyway, when you say the word ziggurat, you have to think about high and not just a place for people to live, but in the time that we're talking about right now, as we look at the Tower of Babel, a place where people can reach up toward heaven. It's actually a spiritual building, and we'll see that right now. So here we go. Genesis 11, verse 1. We're finally at the verse 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. So here's our context coming in, which sort of makes sense, because if the 3 sons of Noah spawned all these groups, it's very obvious that they're probably all speaking the same language in just a couple generations. Now, they're living very long as well, much longer than us, maybe 4 to 10 times the lifespan that we have today. So you can preserve this language over a very long time in very few generations. So it makes sense they would speak the same language. And the same words. It's a Hebrew way of doubling the emphasis. Same language, same words. I don't know what your version of the Bible says, but sometimes same words says same sentences, same language. It has basically a vocabulary idea. So they're really only using one set of words, and it's working just fine for them. Now, in Star Trek, you have to forgive me, I am something of a Trekkie. There was an episode where Captain Kirk had to fight the Gorn, and a higher life form was going to see who won, and basically the loser was wiped off, was going to be wiped off the universe. And so they put a representative from humans, Captain Kirk, and a representative of the Gorns. He looks like this. And they were going to battle each other, and so the higher beings, I forget their name, gave both of them these little mechanical devices, and they're actually universal translators. Captain Kirk thought it was a recording device so he can record his, today, day 1. But so actually, it turns out if you put Star Trek, this episode, back in the Tower of Babel, you would need those because everyone spoke the same language. There was no problem with saying the same thing. Everyone worldwide, the Canaanites, the Japhites, everybody spoke the same language. It was really a pretty cool deal. So no need for universal translators. But it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So where's that? Well, you're looking over the Saudi Peninsula right here. Israel's on your far left with the Mediterranean Sea. And the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley right in the middle. As you go east, which is down to the bottom, which actually is where archaeological Ur is today, they went east and they landed in the land of Shinar. So they're actually in that same area there, smack dab in the middle of the most fertile part of the Fertile Crescent in Iraq. Okay, so that's where we are. They moved down to the plain of Shinar. Actually, to this very day, the very flat lands in that alluvial plain where the 2 rivers actually spread out and come out to the Persian Gulf there is very flat because the alluvial overrun. That plain is still called Shinar. Whoa. After that much time? Yeah. And because that's what Bible places are like. They're still called the same thing many thousands of years later. Okay, so they move over there, and when they go over there, they said to one another, "Come, let's make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. So they said, since we're out in this alluvial plain, what we have here is a lot of alluvial overrun, a lot of fine particulate clay. There are no stones here. We can't build buildings out of stone, which is what we're used to. And to this very day, if you go over to Israel, everything's built out of stone because they got lots of stone. But when you get to the alluvial plain in the Mesopotamian Valley, there's no stone. There's just mud. But you can take mud and form a brick and either sun harden it or put it in a furnace, and it'll get really hard enough to actually build buildings. So they decided, while we're here and we have all this building material, let's build a city right here. And by the way, we don't have any lime to make mortar like we have in our bricks right here, so we need something to stick them together. Well, they had tar pits, so they would put tar between them, or bitumen is what the old name of it is. It looks like bitumen, bitumen. They put that in between. So let's build buildings out of that. That'll work really nicely. In fact, do you remember the story of Daniel and his friends? And you remember his 3 friends got put in the fiery furnace? You know what that fiery furnace was for? Cooking bricks. Because it was in roughly this same area that the only building material was mud. So there you have it. Well, interestingly enough, since I was Googling this week, I typed into Google architecture of Mesopotamia. And you know what they said? It's overwhelmingly one of clay masonry. That's bricks of clay that are fired. And it's usually mortarless, although bitumen was sometimes used. This is what the archaeologists say. They find old buildings made out of fired clay bricks stuck together with black tar. And that's the way it is with the Bible. When it relates to a historical event, we find historical support for it. Am I making that point too strong? Okay. So, verse 4, they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven." And here we start to see the spiritual overtones here, the religious overtones. A top who will reach into heaven. And let's make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Well, this declaration needs to be picked apart just a little bit. For one, they said, it'll reach into heaven. Well, that's really their way of saying where God is. In the ancient idea, when you said, where does man live? Man lives on this level, both feet on the ground right here. But up there, without airplanes, up there is the place we cannot go. So in ancient thinking, where is God who you cannot approach? Where we can't go. He's up there. That's always been the idea. So what they're saying is, you know what? We can circumvent our inability as primitive creatures stuck with both feet on this ground by building the tallest thing we can, and we'll get closer and closer to God the higher we go. And in fact, if we ourselves can climb into heaven, it makes us gods as well. And that's really what's strongly being said in this entire thing. And then they go to this, I wanted to show you this. This is just a repeat of what the serpent was telling Eve in the Garden of Eden during the fall. The serpent tempting Eve says, God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God. And so really, this is the Tower of Babel, is a return to that temptation. If we build a structure high enough, we will be able to knock on the doors of heaven, and we will be like God. That's the whole idea. He says, let's make a name for ourselves. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, remember, if you're going to be Bible scholars, anytime that you see names in the Old Testament especially, and even the New, names mean something, although to us these days, they don't mean anything. They're just given to us, and they don't say anything about our character at all. Like standing in front of me is Matt. Matthew's name means Child of God. Okay, there you go. Is that what you named him, Matthew? Well, okay. Anyway, our names do have connections to meaning, but today we don't name people based on their chief characteristics. But in ancient times, the name meant the characteristic of the person. So don't forget this. A name is a reputation based upon accomplishments. It's really more of a reputation, okay? If someone named me today and I was born and my parents named me Slick Financial Investor Boy, which would be very badly named. then the expectation when I would introduce myself as, hi, I'm Slick Investor Boy, people would say, wow, you must be pretty good when it comes to stocks and bonds and stuff like that. I go, well, no. But if that was my characteristic, or, runs faster than the wind boy, so it tells you something about the person. So the name is a reflection of the internal character, the chief unseen you is what it is. The name is the outside name plaque for the inside you, is what it is. So what they're saying here is that we need to make for ourselves a reputation. If we're going to climb our way into heaven and be God's, we need to have something that we can hang our hat on about why we are called gods, more than just building this tall building. But that's what they're saying. If we build a tall building, then we'll have our accomplishment, and we can call ourselves rightly gods. Because look, we've built this structure, and we're touching the door of heaven. See, that's what they're talking about, is doing something that's God-like in dimensions. But they say, if we don't do that, we're going to be scattered across the face of the earth. Why? Well, they realized, especially since they had the same language, they realized that if they work together, they can do more than if they're separated and work apart. If they're going to be scattered, they're going to be scattered all over the world. I mean, you're going to be completely consumed with growing enough food to feed your family and taking care of stuff. I mean, life. We're not going to be able to do anything great and make a name for ourselves. If we stay together, we can do something great and hence elevate who we are as we touch the doors of heaven. So they understood that. It's like this idea right here. Very common graphic. There's unity in strength. And, and we look at that and go, yes, indeed there is. But it goes a little bit beyond that in their thinking. It's not just there's unity in strength. It's strength in unity. It turns out they're actually knocking on this door right here. Humanism, from a modern definition, is elevating man's ability, making a name for himself, because he believes there is no God. Humanism, because all we have is each other. And so in a lot of humanistic thought, you'll hear over and over again, if we could just get together and do one thing, we will be great as a being, we'll be great if we do it together. But if we separate and divide, we'll never get anything accomplished. So the whole idea in humanism is get together, pool your resources, do great things, and man will elevate himself. And over time, man will get more and more and more godlike. And that's humanism. And that's what they're approaching on right here. They're approaching on that right here. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So here's this little temple, and they're dancing around at the top saying, we're gods, we're gods, we're gods, which brings a great irony to the very next statement that's made right here. Great irony. I hope you can see this. I illustrated it with some stupid graphics. So here we go. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The irony is the fact, God sees everything. But what he's saying in the Hebrew vernacular, what he's saying is, this mighty, mighty building of towering heights was so small from God's perspective, he had to leave home and go look at it because he couldn't see it from where he lived. It was that small. It was that small that God would say, tower, I don't see a tower. Tower reaching to heaven? Don't see no tower reaching to heaven. I guess I have to go down and take a look at this. Of course, God is omniscient. He knows what's going on. So this is the writer's way of saying it was so insignificant. God had to leave home to go find it. That's what he's saying. That's why the irony here is it's just great. Because here you've got these little guys dancing around the top of their ziggurat going, we're gods, we're gods. And God says, I better go down and find out what's going on because I don't see it. These purported godlike creatures. It's almost laughable. First time I read this, I laughed out loud. God came down to see their city. You mean he didn't just have to turn around and say, oh, there's the top of a ziggurat? Where'd that come from? No. He had to leave home and go look for it. That's how small it was. From God's perspective, it's insignificant. It's just laughable. Well, verse 6, then the Lord said, behold, they're one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Nothing that they purpose to do will be impossible for them. So the common language allows them to do a common project that they hope will elevate their reputation in the universe as being godlike. And God says, interestingly enough, I sort of agree with him. If they can continue to speak with one another and organize and communicate and work together as one, wow, it's not going to stop with the ziggurat. You see, he says that. They have the same, and this is what they began to do. God's saying, this is just the first of many things, many huge things they can do if they work together effectively. It's realistically, it's part of what we saw back in Genesis 2, where God says, I made them in my image. Now, it doesn't mean that God made them gods. What it says is there's a lot about who God is that he invested in them so that they can relate to God. And one of those is creativity. One of those is design, is vision, to be able to envision what you're going to build. But a lot of these things are very creation-like, very God-like in that sense. And so God's saying, you know what? If they put their minds to it, they can achieve almost everything. Now, at this point, a humanist in 2013 would read this and go, yeah, buddy, that's us. We're hot stuff. And God himself said, we're hot stuff. Okay, there you go. All we have to do is get together and we can make life perfect for mankind. But there's a dark side to this picture. And that's what you have to realize. And we've already read about the dark side in this picture. There's great danger here about the fact that they can do anything. And to give you an idea where I'm going to start to go, when I was growing up, I had a very good friend named Larry. I won't tell you his last name because someday he'll see this on the internet and he'll get really mad at me. But Larry was the chief mischievist in our neighborhood. Larry had an incredibly capable imagination of how to get in trouble. And so I think he would sit in his bedroom waiting to see me someday and say, Jim, I've got this great idea. And one of his great ideas when we were growing up, we were frustrated by the fact that we lived in a state that didn't have fireworks. You couldn't buy firecrackers. And for a small boy, that's the worst thing in the world. No firecrackers, no fireworks. It was just a horrible thing. And so Larry said, you know what? Gasoline burns and makes big flames. All we need to do, and every house has them. There's a gas can next to every lawnmower. The lawnmowers that our parents, our dads, force us to go mow the lawns, there's gasoline in those cans right there. So all we need to do to have a great time tonight is take a baggie, fill it with gasoline, take it over to the creek, which is right across from our house. Like right in front of our house. Take it over to the creek, get a lighter, and woof, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so he proposed that. In our great judgment as small boys, we did it. So we went over the creek and thinking, this is going to be awesome. And we're going to make a fireball that rivals none we've ever seen before. Now, we should all be maimed right now. I don't know how God protected us, but sure enough, we made a tiny fire on the stones of the little beach head of the creek right there to make kind of a nice space, away from the overhanging trees of the creek. We at least knew that. We weren't going to start a fire because that gets the authorities involved. And we started this small fire right there, just twigs actually. And then Larry said, okay, all you need to do then is now just take the baggie and go like this on top of the fire. And I said, not me, Larry, you do it. Okay. So Larry went over. At the last minute, he had enough smarts to realize that maybe I ought to take a few steps back, or else he'd have no eyebrows or hair or skin, a lot of that kind of stuff. So he stood a couple feet back, not quite enough, and he just chucked the baggie up into the air, thus, aerating and atomizing all the gasoline, and it fell over the flame, and there was an incredible fireball. Yeah, and Larry was pretty much in the middle of it. He hit the ground really instantly after it went up, because it spooked him because he was right in front of it. The rest of us are standing back there going, whoa, wishing we had more baggies of gasoline. Now, that's really stupid. So if you're listening now or watching the internet, don't do that. It's really bad. Don't try this at home. But the problem is that if we were infinitely creative in the source of the fuel for our entertainment, and for our own purposes, we did something which could have destroyed us, and actually should have. That's why we're in the danger zone with mankind right here. Because left to ourselves, we have a tragic bent towards self-destruction. Now, and that's not a theory. That's the proven track record of mankind. It's the easiest thing to confirm about the nature of man versus what the Bible says about man. It's because we don't seem to get any better at it. We just get more technologically able to bring self-destruction upon ourselves. We have this tendency to just do crazy things. And he's already told us this in Genesis. He said before the flood, God says, "And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth." And that word great is not a small word, that's huge. It was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, do you want those people to be given infinite power to do anything they dream up? Maybe it all got fixed after the flood. Maybe God wiped out all the bad people, and then after the flood, post-flood, everyone kind of said, "Whoa, we better shape up. We're going to be good people now." No, because Genesis 8, after the flood, the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. Now, that's one of the fundamental reasons why you can't ignore the first 11 chapters of the Bible, Genesis 1 through 11. Because it tells us that this is the nature of mankind, and it always will be. Unfortunately, after the fall, something stuck. I don't know, in our DNA or who we are, but something stuck that left us inevitably self-destructive sinners. That's us. Anyone in this room that says, "Oh, that's not me," is lying, because you know this is what it's. That's the reason that we read this, because then if man is indeed that messed up, then how will we ever come back to be able to be with God? The original intention, remember, in the Garden of Eden was for God and man to enjoy one another. God took a rest on the seventh day from creating the entire universe. It's okay, I'm here. Let's just chat for a while. But man said, in the fall, and this is what happened, and we are the inheritors of that kind of inevitable, self-destructive sinfulness. So we have a problem, but God's provided a solution. So here he's saying it again. So when he says here at the Tower of Babel that this is what's going on, he has to do something about this. See, we have this propensity of taking wonderful beach-like scenes like this and turning them into locations of the greatest horror and destruction imaginable. And that is us. So when God sees the Tower of Babel, he sees man working together so effectively, and he says, truthfully so, man can do anything if he puts his mind to it, if he sticks together doing it. For instance, here, an atom bomb is actually deconstructing the creation of actual elements. It's not a chemical reaction where you take one chemical and another chemical and you put them together, like you used to take baking soda and vinegar and, you make volcanoes and science fairs. And no, that's not what it is. You actually are fundamentally destroying a piece of created matter. You're destroying it. And the energy equivalent of that mass is this. We've actually gotten to the point that we can deconstruct what God did in creation and destroy on a maximal scale. This is why God is disturbed at the Tower of Babel, because he knows this is the end. So to forestall it, he has a great solution. Verse 7, "Come, let's go down and there confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." By the way, if you're troubled by that plural self-reference God makes to himself, us go down, go back and look at what we talked about in Genesis 1. Okay, we're just going to keep moving from this. So they will not understand one another's speech. So this is actually a very good plan. See, with me and Larry, if my parents or his parents had gotten wind of the fact that we were going to do this stupid thing with gasoline, what they could have done instead is sort of gone, whoosh, if they could, whoosh, and make it so that Larry and I couldn't talk to each other anymore. And if we can't talk to each other, we're not going to cook up such a stupid idea, and we're not going to get ourselves burned, largely. Because it's part of talking to each other where you get all revved up. Hey, you have to be fireball. Oh, it's going to be great. Let's go. By the way, that fireball was visible for the whole block. And our street that we lived on, the dead-end street that we lived on, had houses on one side of the street and no houses on the other side, because that's where the creek was and there's woods. And so the front of every one of these houses that night saw this gigantic fireball across the street. And it's the summertime, so people are outside and it's night, And so we decided the smartest thing for us to do, once we realized, gee, that might have been seen, is that we thought we need to run back to the house and then tell our folks, hey, did you see that big fireball across the street? And you know what? Our folks figured it out pretty fast. So they won't understand each other's speech. That'll kind of slow down the process at least. Now, I got to do one last dig on Star Trek. Star Trek: The Next Generation was a decade or so after the first one, where you have the universal translators that they relied upon in Star Trek with Captain Kirk. They had universal translators here with Captain Picard as well. And yet they did a very interesting episode where the universal translators were working perfectly, but they still couldn't understand each other. And you know why? This is great. It's because the other guy talked in cultural metaphors all the time. You could understand what he said, but it didn't mean anything to you. And it became such a piece of Star Trek lore that they made T-shirts and bumper stickers like this one, because this is what Picard heard in his universal translator, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, and Picard would go, oh, what? Sometimes even universal translators can't help you communicate. There's something at the bottom of this. There's a Shaka when the walls fell. I can't read the other ones. Anyway, so even universal translation, I just had to get that in. Even when we speak with the right words, we're not even speaking the same language. Okay, anyway, so he confuses their language, hoping to slow down this process. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. Babel actually means confusion. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Well, it makes sense from a sociological perspective that if you're in the same region in China with a bunch of people, and only some of them you can talk to, and the rest of them just shake their heads and go, Darmak and Jalad at Tanagra? What? I don't get that. So it's very natural that what you're going to do is you're going to clump together with the people that understand you and then you can talk to, and you're going to make your own civilization. And sure enough, that's what happens, is they spread it all over the world with people who can understand them. And God sort of broke up this big technological party that was hoping to elevate man into some godhood thing. But he really only slowed it down. And we'll see in just a second. So this is what he does. He scatters them by way of giving them different languages. Now, it's interesting. Language, you can do your own research on this, but the emergence of language in evolutionary science is a very puzzling thing. And so I encourage you to take a look at it, because there are no really good explanations for how language evolves in an evolutionary context, if evolution is true, which it's not, but if you said it was, it's difficult. But even what's more difficult is to try and to explain the evolution of separated languages. It's very interesting. It's an interesting problem for evolution science to this very day. In fact, it was a tremendous problem to the LDS Church in the 1902-1903 period, because one of the critics of the LDS Church, who happened to be in Washington, D.C., wrote a letter to the church and said, if every Indian in the United States came from the same people, Lehi's family basically, at around 400 AD, that's impossible because there's too many language stocks demonstrated in all the Native Americans that are in the continent. Can't have happened. And so one guy, B.H. Roberts, who was their go-to guy, thinker, intellectual at the time, said, I'll go look into this and see if this is really a good charge. He looked into it. It's like 1906 to 1910, somewhere like that. He looked into it and said, oh, holy smokes, that is a big problem. They can't have been speaking one language in 400 AD, and now we have all these language stocks. And when I say language stocks, a stock is a group of languages. For instance, if you speak English, English is part of one language stock, which includes Spanish, French, Italian. You know the similarities in those? Multiple language stocks Native Americans have. It says, don't think they were speaking one language in 400 AD. So language is a very interesting problem. So here's how God does it. He scatters them, changes their ability to be able to coordinate what they do together by that. So here's how a critic would now read this passage of Scripture. He says, I reject your God because he's a divider. He divided mankind. Aren't we supposed to unite with mankind? And my response would be, well, your understanding, you misunderstand. He's being a preserver. Remember the atom bomb scene? He's being a preserver of mankind is what he's doing. No, he's keeping man from reaching his full potential, which again is really a big part of humanism to this day. Well, I agree, but his full potential is self-destruction. That's the problem. That's where it's going to go. Well, no, man is evolving upward. Is your God threatened by that? So you think that man can evolve into a God? Well, someday, sure. Tell your imaginary God that he's obsolete. And this is a very accurate representation of what humanism says this very day. And my last response is, listen, God is real. He created everything. He loves you. He offers to save you from your own self-destruction. And by the way, he's coming back. That's the message of Genesis 1 through 11, right there. And you could add to it if you want to. God demonstrated his dissatisfaction with tainted and warped and twisted and rotten humanity and wiped it out once with water. And another day is coming in judgment where a large part of it will be wiped out again. He's coming back. And that's the sobering message that you get out of this. And yet, he gives us solid pointers to the fact that there is a rescue coming, if you'll accept it. That rescue for the time of Noah was the ark, and for those who followed God in the ark. There is a salvation in the midst of this coming judgment. God did it once before. He served notice to mankind. He's going to do it again. And in fact, it echoes the words in Hebrews 2, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? That's what Genesis 1 through 11 is supposed to sober you up to. Yeah, whatever. If that works for you, okay. Just keep your fantasy to yourself. Humanism, because all we have is each other. No, there is a God who created this place, who owns this place, who wiped it out once when mankind stiff-armed God from the presence of his own creation, who will again come again in judgment. There's lots of that. Some of the earliest things we hear Jesus say, along with John the Baptist, is repent. The kingdom of God's near. That means the owner's coming back, and judgment's going to happen. And he's going to see what you've been doing as you've rented this place from him, what you've done with it. No, it's not because all we have is each other. And yet, this is the going thinking. Steve Jobs, before he died, says, we want to stand at the intersection of computers and humanism. That is, we want to technically enable the Tower of Babel efforts. And ironically, literally, through the creation of universal translators. Tell me this is not weird. So we are actually at the technological spot that what God did when he confused languages only delayed our ability to work together. So now that in the 21st century, that's not a problem anymore. You can speak into your phone, it can translate into another language, and you can have it spoken to the person you're talking to. We have universal translators. The curse at the Tower of Babel has now become null. And we have technologically leaped past it. And according to Steve Jobs, he did exactly what he wanted to do. He enabled the ability for humanism to transcend all of those divisions. And so now the mantra that you get, again, coming full circle back to the Tower of Babel, is we all need to work together and hence speed up and elevate the status of man. We've come exactly back to the same place they were on the plains of Shinar. Exactly. And yet now we're not cooking bricks and using tar and to put them together. We're making little devices to do it. Back in the 70s, they said the solution to unifying mankind was Coca-Cola. Now, if you're not old enough, you look back, you just can't believe this. They would have all of these people from different nationalities standing in the commercial on hillsides holding Cokes. There'd be Koreans and there'd be blacks from Africa, and it was everybody. It was like the United Nations of young people standing on hillsides holding Coca-Colas and singing a song. And then the catch line at the end was, it's the real thing, Coke. This is mankind's persistent desire to elevate himself and make a society that excludes God. That excludes God. And yet, God is the landowner. And this is the nature of the conflict when you get to judgment. God's the landowner. He's the landowner. There's a really great parable. I should have looked this up. I apologize. It's a great parable that Jesus tells about a landowner who owned a vineyard. Do you remember that? How grapes? And how the landowner, he's got business elsewhere. So he puts people in charge of running the vineyard. And part of the price of running the vineyard is to pay 10% of the profits of the grapes back to the owner. That's just what you did because it's not your land. I mean, you did all the work, so you get to keep 90%. By the way, that's the source of tithing in the Old Testament, is you're paying the landowner back his due, which is always 10%. Tithing is a reminder of the fact that someone else owns the property. But anyway, and it sure as they don't send the money. Do you remember this parable? They don't send the money over and over again. So the landowners start sending emissaries in, coming in saying, by the way, your payment's overdue. You need to send your 10% to the man. He owns this place. These are his vines. This is his property. You got to do this. And so what do? They treat them very badly. They kill them. And finally, the owner says, I know what I'll do. They kill my emissaries, but I'll send my own son. And if I send my son, they'll respect his name, and he'll finally get the message through. And they didn't. He killed the son as well. Does that ring any bells? And that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of this creation. There is the landowner, God. He's the creator. That's what Genesis 1 through 11 is trying to tell. He created the place. He owns the place. The purpose of the place is his. You better get in line and figure out what that's all about. It's not about this. Or John Lennon wrote this song called Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. See? This is reversing the Babel curse. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Unfortunately, when he says nothing to kill or die for, he's not going to avoid this by singing this song. There will be plenty to kill and die for. Why? Well, because we are tragically bent towards self-destructive sin. I believe what it says in Genesis 1, and I believe the track record of mankind ever since. He goes on in the song, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Yes. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. I want to stick my finger down my throat. There is this well-intentioned but poorly informed persistence on mankind that if we get together, do one thing, everything will finally be utopian, idealistic, happy, free. And if man were made of different stuff, I'd agree. But man is not made of that kind of stuff. Left on his own, mankind ends up turning his society into the Lord of the Flies or Larry and Jim dumping gasoline on a fire. And that's really where we go. It's inevitable. That's what we do. And yet in the midst of all of that, God continues to say, but I love you. I want to preserve you. I want as many as possible to get to know who I am. That's why I created this place. That's why I created the Garden of Eden, so we could walk in the cool of day. That's why I took a day off from creation on the seventh day, so we could sit down in our lawn chairs and go, man, isn't this great? Let's talk for a while. Let's meet. That always has been the intention. God and man in fellowship from the very, very, very beginning, from when the rocks were cooling. That was always been the intention. And God says, as a persistent theme to the Old Testament and New, if you will draw near to me, I will draw near to you. A God who wants relationship. Because, as the sociologist I listened to this week said, we are made for connection with each other, but primarily with our Creator. So God's not a divider. He's a gatherer. And this is where, when you read passages like this, it's good to stand back and say, okay, I see God dividing in the Tower of Babel. I see how it's preservative for mankind. But will God ever be a gatherer ever again in the history of mankind? Yes, because he wants fellowship with us. So I'll just give you a couple of passages. This is one of my favorites, Isaiah 66, verse 18. This is God speaking. For I know their works and their thoughts. The time is coming to gather all nations and tongues. See, there it is. And they shall come and see my glory. And I will set a sign among them and will send survivors from them to the nations, like his emissaries, to Tarshish and to Put and to Lud and to Meshech and Tubal and Javan, to the distant coastlands that have neither heard my fame nor seen my glory, and they will declare my glory among the nations. Does this ring any bells from what we read in Genesis? These are the nations that came out of the three sons of Noah. Javan right there is where we get the word Ionian, and Ionian is the old name for Greece. There's a lot in there. Tarshish, most likely is Spain. So anyway, so what he's saying right here, God is saying, even though you've been scattered, and it was for your preservation, a day is coming while I'll send emissaries to all those different places and gather you back in. That's always been my intention. All I've been doing is preserving you until that time when I can bring you back. There is a rescue. There is a rescue after our rebellion. That's when he's looking forward here in Isaiah 66 and saying, here's the rescue in action. And all those outlying people, it's not just the nation of Israel. It's everyone. Tarshish, Lud, Put. Put is Libya, by the way. Yeah. Muammar Gaddafi and all those guys. Now, here's an interesting pointer for the fact he's going to do this. When the day of Pentecost comes, Jesus is seen risen, and then 7 weeks later, the day of Pentecost comes, and the apostles go out and they start speaking and preaching to the gathered cosmopolitan worldwide occupants that come to Jerusalem to do this one celebration. And as the apostles come out and start speaking to them, they start speaking in everyone's own language. Which languages? They were amazed and astonished, saying, well, aren't these all who are speaking Galileans? And by the way, Galilean is a catchphrase for backwoodsy kind of no morons, is what that means. Aren't they Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? How is that possible? There's Parthians and Medes and Elamites. And by the way, Elam is Iran. Yeah, Persians, yeah. Parthians, Medes, Elamites. The Medes are the Kurdish people. See, isn't this fun? Okay, I'll stop saying that. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, where we just were. Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the districts of Libya. That's Put right there. Around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. Cretans, people from Crete. And Arabs. We hear them in our own tongues speaking of the mighty deeds of God. So although God has distracted us and preserved us by giving us different tongues, he is saying, I'm going to gather you together, and the separation of tongues isn't going to matter anymore. I can even reverse that at will. I can impose it. I can reverse it. On the day of Pentecost, we get our taste of the fact that he can reverse it. For what basis? So that man can unify and make himself great? No. So that the glory of God might become universally known. And now we're getting to why he's going to do the gathering. Revelation 5, we read this earlier this morning. Worthy are you to take the book, talking about Jesus in the narrative there. Worthy are you to take the book and to break its seals, for you were slain and purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. The rescue has happened. And the rescue was through God's Messiah, Jesus. And the rescue happened. And the rescue wasn't just for the nation of Israel, even though he's Israel's Messiah. He's the rescuer for the entire world, including every tribe, every nation, every tongue. Those tongues that God confused, all of them. So although God's confusion of the language at Babel disabled man from being able to work well together, and now we're getting past that technologically, what it didn't do was get in the way of the communication between mankind and God. And God can circumvent that at will. And that's what he's doing right here. By the way, when you see the word purchase, always think the word redeem. Or when you see the word redeem, think purchase. That's what redeem means. Redemption, redeem, it means to purchase something. It's the same thing as going into the grocery store and handing over cash to buy something. That's redeeming the groceries, is what it is. So what was the currency of that redemption? What was the currency of that price that was paid? The blood of Jesus. That's what paid for all the nations. You and I included, by the way. Most of us in this room are Japhites. Some of us are Hamites. We're from all over the place. If you look at our DNA, we're a Mongol race, many of us here. We come from so many different places. But that doesn't stop God, because God's no respecter of where you came from, or which son of Noah you came from, or even if you were from the nation of Israel. The whole issue is, do you accept and trust and embrace and rely upon that currency, the blood of Christ? in order to reverse the self-destructive sinfulness that's keeping you from God. And if you do, you're included in that purchase. Colossians 3, I think this is my last one. Paul says, put on the new self, who is being renewed or regenerated to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. A renewal in which there's no distinction between Greek and Jew. There's no distinction between circumcised and uncircumcised. That's the Jew and non-Jew. No distinction between barbarian and Scythian. We talked about the Scythians a couple weeks ago. They were the nasty guys who could ride on horseback with bows and arrows and shoot little tiny things from long distances while they're running on horses. Scary folks. Barbarian, Scythian, slave or free man. But here's the issue of the transformed mankind. But Christ is all and in all. So the humanitarian effort to bring man together as one, I said, doesn't work unless you change the nature of man. And here's where God changes the nature of man. And now we can come together and unify and gather on the basis of Christ and not on the basis of elevating ourselves and our own skills. It's about lifting him up, not lifting me up. And that's the fundamental difference between those who follow Christ and those who don't follow Christ. Who are you lifting up? Yourself? Are you elevating yourself, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, doing enough good works every single day that they'll accrue to your account so when you get to the pearly gates and Peter looks at your folder and he opens it up and says, wow, look at all these good works. You certainly can come into my heaven. That's totally false. That's one of the most bogus, one of the most reprehensible lies I can think of. That's not it. When you get to the gates, the currency is not going to be your portfolio of good works. The currency is going to be the blood of Christ. And whether you're willing to say, why should I be here? Why am I going to be allowed in? Well, not because of anything I've done, because after all, I'm tragically bent towards self-destruction. And were it not for the preservation of God himself, I wouldn't be standing here today, who brought the rescuer for my benefit, so that I can say, it's nothing about me. It's all about Christ. And then whoever lets people in out of heaven will say, good answer, good answer. But if you stand there in the shining intensity of the righteousness of God and you say, my righteousness is sufficient for this place. And that's why we're outspoken, because there are thousands and millions of people who think that's going to work. And there are people who are just walking in the dark and don't know. I just don't know. So here's the overall look at the Bible as we close this. The entire Bible, starting with Genesis 1. You have God who creates. He creates a creation. And because of the Sabbath in that creation, there's a strong implication that God wants to cool his heels and spend time with us. And that's what God's waiting for us to do, is to turn and to come to him as his creation and to enjoy him as our creator. That was always the Garden of Eden intention for mankind, was that kind of fellowship. The creation enjoying God himself. But we stiff-armed God and went into rebellion. And that original plan is going to be forestalled for a while. Now that we're in rebellion, we are not of the right stuff to be able to do that anymore. Our nature has changed generation to generation to generation. So is there a solution to that? And yes, we found there's a rescue that's planned, and it has already happened in Jesus. We're redeemed, we're purchased, we're reconciled, the relationship is fixed. We're recreated from the inside out, we're regenerated. And finally, we're back to where we're supposed to be with God, and that's called rest. That's the entire picture of the Bible from Genesis, where we were in 1 through 11, to Revelation. So after Genesis 11, which we're going to stop today, from there until Revelation, it's all about the rescue. And if you didn't know there was a rebellion, the rescue doesn't make any sense. All have fallen short of the glory of God. That means you're not going to be able to stand in his presence and say, look how good I am, and survive. All have fallen short of the glory of God. All of us. And Isaiah says, all your good works, all those wonderful things you do, walking people across the street, giving pies to people when they don't deserve, they're just like filthy rags. By the way, those are menstrual cloths. They're filthy rags. That's what your good works are like. When God looks at them and says, good works? Yeah, I don't think so. That's a very poor attempt. Just like he looked out of heaven on the ziggurat of Ur and on the Tower of Babel and said, really? Really? I guess I better come down and take a look because I can't see it from here. The rescue has happened, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'd love to talk to you after the service. We can talk, but it's as simple as that. Mankind is tragically, inevitably bent towards sin, and that sin separates us from God. It separates us from his original plan for us to enjoy him. And yet Christ came. The rescue was hinted at and pointed at in Genesis 1 through 11. It's talked about continually through the nation of Israel. A rescuer is coming. God is my redeemer, the one who will purchase me back. He will purchase me back. And then boom, right there in the first century, God in the flesh, Emmanuel, Jesus, comes and he says to Pilate, for this reason I've been born, to die. So that his currency can bring us in the presence of God. And all you need to do is admit that you're a sinner. You're unable to be able to cleanse yourself sufficiently to enjoy this plan of being in God's presence. And to say, I trust alone in the currency of the blood of Jesus. That's all you got to do. So if you don't know what that's all about, come talk to me, or any of us here would love to. That's the message of the Bible. Don't ever get in the position of being a Babelite, where you think that what you built yesterday is going to improve God's estimation of who you are today. God, look at the wonderful life I'm living. I just did this wonderful thing for these people. You know, that's got to count for something, doesn't it? No. We are capable of doing some good, yes. But when it comes to the stark contrast of the righteousness of God to our goodness, we'll never be able to earn our way into that presence again. Ever. Ever. And yet Paul writes to the church at Ephesus and he says, the incredible thing is, yeah, we're saved by grace through faith. And that's it. And it's not a matter of works. So that none of us will go around boasting. Did you see what I did this week? But in the next breath he says, but we're built for good works. It's just that they don't earn anything anymore. They don't earn anything. They're not a salary. They're not a payroll toward heaven. They're good works that delight us in being able to reflect the goodness of God, his grace unmerited to others, so that they'll catch it. That's what it's all about. So forget about I'm pretty good stuff. I gave a lot of money last week to the church. I gave a lot of money to the missionaries overseas. I helped some people very selflessly this last week. If you think that's accruing to account, you need to stop that because you've just turned into building the Tower of Babel in your own house. You need to walk away and say, were it not for the grace of God, I couldn't stand. If God were to count sins, which one of us could stand? No. We have a wonderfully gracious God who made this place so that we can find him and enjoy him. And that doesn't just wait until heaven. And that's not just turned off at Eden. It's like right now and on through eternity. Right now and on through eternity. Enjoying his presence, enjoying who he is. Draw near to me and I'll draw near to you. I'm waiting. It's Sabbath. I don't have to work today, God says. I'm waiting. I don't have to work today. Creation's done. Just say the word. I'm there. And so here you have this God painted through the entire book who wants us to enjoy him forever, starting the day you embrace your brokenness and his grace. And that's who we are, a collection of people who don't come to this place because we want to support this organization. We're a group of people who have independently found a God who loves us, and we delight in being together and encouraging one another about that. Oh. Let's pray. Father, your word is just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary. Thank you for how your persistence resulting in your touching us. How you reached out throughout the entire timeline of history. How you effected a rescue on our behalf. And that even while we are yet sinning, Christ died for us. Such persistence, such love. And so, Lord, my heart leaps with the same astonishment. Not only the persistence of your love, But when he says over and over, your loving kindness is everlasting. I mean, even more persistent than my own stupid sinfulness and generations of stupid sinfulness. Your loving kindness is everlasting. Lord, I can't take any credit for where I stand today. Seems like you've done all the hard lifting, you've done all the initiative, and you came in the flesh and you died for us. And I benefit. That is just amazing grace. That is just amazing grace. Lord, if there's those here that don't understand that, I just pray that your Spirit would give them an understanding, break their hearts because of their sin, draw them in your loving kindness, and begin that lifelong and eternal process of delighting in knowing you and walking with you and being delighted in you and wondering and talking with friends and family who found the same thing and say, have you heard about the loving kindness of God? Wow. Oh, wow. And Lord, for those in this community that don't know, and for the greater area, not just here, who are banking on the fact that the checks that they're writing on their bank account of good works through life are somehow going to cash in their benefit at judgment. Lord, give us hearts of broken compassion for those. Lord, give us hearts that prefer speaking truth and love rather than preserving comforts. But God, I don't want to make a scene. But maybe you need to make a scene because there's so much at stake. Your loving kindness is everlasting. Thank you for bringing a rescue. And from this point on, for our entireties of our lives and for eternity, we will wonder at this Jesus who came to rescue us at the lowest place in our lives. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.